4-6, writing equations in slope-intercept form. Here you can see on our skill 8EE6, we're going to write equations in this y equals mx plus b where we need slope and our initial value. You can see in the skill it says that here, as long as we also done with this y equals mx for a line through the origin. And today you're going to see that we're going to write an equation given through two ordered pairs. For me, when we talk about writing an equation, I talk about 5 steps. So every time we're going to write down the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we're going to do these 5 steps. You're not going to have to write them in this extensive form, but this is what we're talking about. We're going to start here right away with our slope-intercept form, which is what they want. And we're going to end up with our equation written that way, because once we find our slope, then step 3, we just plug that back in here for the m. And then step 4, we find our y-intercept, our b, our starting value, and then we just plug that in to that b value in our equation, and we're done. So technically only the even steps, there's work, and steps 1, 3, and 5, the odds, are all going to deal with this equation of y equals mx plus b. Write an equation of the line in slope-intercept form. Write an equation. 5 steps. Step 1, write down y equals mx plus b. Yes, every time we are going to write that down. So it said write an equation. That's going to give us some muscle memory. That's also going to help you when you say, oh, Mr. Walls, how do I write an equation? I might say, I feel like there were lots of steps for that. You remember that? And you might go, oh, you mean the 5 thing? Yep, 5 things. Step 2, find your slope. Find m. So your slope is, remember, rise over run. Since they gave us a graph, let's write that on in. Yes, every time. On 2, you're going to write down find m, which is slope, which is rise over run. So from this point, we rise 1, 2, 3. Count very carefully. Remember, since we went down, that's a -3. And how much did we go over? Don't count where you start. Just count how much you move. 1, 2, 3, 4. Count carefully, recount if you need to. Remember, don't mark up your textbook, but you can use the eraser or your finger to count, the same on a screen, or if it's on a worksheet, feel free to make marks like that. Step 3, write the equation again. It says to plug in m, so y equals, what is m? -3/4. We just found that. And then write down x plus b, and away we go. Step 4, find your starting value. Find b, your y-intercept. Where, since we have a lovely graph, where does that cross the y-axis at? Ba-ding! Right there. Careful. That's your y-intercept, which is b, and that equals -2. Done. Step 5, plug it on in. Y equals, keep that slope of a -3/4 x plus, now plug in your b. What did we just find b to be in the last problem? Bingo. Done. And from there, you can put a box around step 5, or even just around that equation, because that is our final answer. Y equals a -3/4 x plus a -2. You have written it in slope-intercept form. Same instructions carry over from last time. Write an equation in slope-intercept form. So since they want it in slope-intercept form, let's do our 5 steps, where step 1 literally is writing out slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. Step 2, you don't need to change colors, but I'm going to do it. Find slope. That was m equals rise over run. Yep, please write that on in. If you need to, you can sneak in the word find slope there in front of that. Otherwise, here we go. Since I have a graph, we'll count. It tells me I rise 1, and count carefully. Don't count this where you started. 1, 2, 3, 4. You ran 4. Now, step 3, you plug it on in. Back to the equation. Y equals, we just found what m was up here, so plug it on in. 1/4 x plus b. That's it. That's all we do on the odd step. We plug it back in. Step 4 is to find your y-intercept. Find that initial value. Find B. Where does that graph cross the y-axis? Where is that point 0 something at? Right here. Well, that y-intercept is at 0, 3. That's why we get that y-intercept value of 3. And now step 5, you're back to an odd, you're back to that equation. Y equals, leave the m of 1/4, x plus, now plug in that b that we just found, and you're done. This is our final answer. Notice you can go back and double check. We are at 1, 2, 3 for that y-intercept. We did go up 1 and over 4 positive for a positive 1/4. That is writing them in slope-intercept form. So you can put a big old check there that you can do that. Or down here, write an equation of y equals mx plus b for a line through the y-axis, the y-intercept of b, and then as you scroll on down, here it is again. I'm writing an equation given 2 ordered pairs. So it says you can make a table, but we are just working on graphing them, and we're finding that rate of change in a y-intercept as well. Again, it says to write an equation. This time there's no graph. We just have 2 points. That's perfectly fine. Anytime you see this, write an equation. You may not actually be smiling, but you can try to smile and remember that you're going to do 5 steps. Step 1, y equals mx plus b. Step 2, you're going to find your slope. Now, usually we like to say that m equals slope and that it's rise over run. And again, as I've mentioned before, you could go and graph these 2 points and do rise over run. But since they're just 2 points there, I'm not going to do rise over run. I'm going to do the change in y over the change in x. So I'm going to use m, or slope equals the rise, which is the change in y values over the change in x values. You got 2 points. Pick one of them to go first. I'm just going to take this guy. For whatever reason, I picked it first. What is the y value in this point? A -1. So I'm going to write that in. -1. And its x value is 0. So I'm going to write them that way because what I really want to focus in on is the change in y. So then I'm going to come over to this point and get its y value and plug that on in over its x value. So we're doing the change in the y values from -1 to -1 and the change in x values from 0 to 4. Don't subtract, add the opposite to help with mental math, because now we're going to see that that is 0 over -4, which tells me, when we simplify that out, that our slope, m equals 0. You can have a slope of 0. That does work. That does happen. So we just keep on going. On to step 3. I'm going to put my point 3 up here. Y equals, now I'm going to plug in 0 for my x, because that's my slope, my m, plus b. And now on step 4, we find our y-intercept. We find our b, whichever one you want to put them in, or you want to put them both down. Now, it's not graphed, so we can't see that. So we're going to look for, we're going to look at these points up here. Does one of them feature our y-intercept? Does one of them start with the value 0? And if it does, bingo. That means that this right here, they gave us our y-intercept right here of -1. Because when you look at that point, it's graphed on the y-axis. So b equals -1. You're done there. So then step 5, just plug it on in. Y equals, well, it's got 0x, which could just disappear, but I'm going to write it out like that so I can see it first. Plus a -1. So you might see it written like this, and I would accept that. You might also see it just written as y equals a -1, since that 0x disappears. I will accept either of these answers on that. When you have 2 equations, that's how we figure them out. We got to do the 5 steps, and when they give us a point like this, With it in there, you're set to go. If not, we have to pick one of those 2 points and plug it in. So just for practice, let me show that to you since I don't have an example like that and don't want to take the time. Let's pretend that neither of these points featured the number 0 and then something, nothing 0b. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take this step 3, and then to find our b, we're going to pick a point. Again, pretending that we didn't get this point here where it's 0 something. If you don't see the y-intercept, they didn't give it to you, they didn't tell you what the initial value is, then what we do on step 4 is you pick a point. If you need to make that note to yourself, write it on in. And it doesn't matter which one you pick, whichever one you like better, whichever one you think is going to work out best. For me, I'm going to pick this guy, 4, -1, and you plug it in. Meaning up here, where we had our equation in number 3, plug in the point 4, -1, where the -1 is the y, and then we've got 0 times that x value, which is 4, plus b. Now you just clean it up. 0 times 4 is, just 0, so that cancels out. So you got 0 plus b equals -1. From there you solve for b, so if you had to get rid of a value here, you do that by adding the opposite, but since it's just 0, it's gone, it cancels out. b equals -1. Oh, we found it. So then again, step 5, y equals 0x plus your b, your y-intercept, your initial value. If you need to use one of the points to plug it in, you can. If not, you don't need to go through that extra step. If you didn't notice it, that's fine. You can do that work. The graph shows the distance remaining to complete a tunnel. Write an equation, it says, that represents the distance y remaining after x months. Got to write an equation. You guessed it. Couple of steps. Couple different ways to do it, but since we're on it, y equals mx plus b. Part 2, find your slope. That's where you're going to do it. Rise over run. But when they give you a graph, be very careful. From this point, we do go down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You are correct. But that 7 is not actually 7. Notice we started here at 3,500, and then we came all the way down here, not to that 1,500, but in between it. What's the change between those two? More so, maybe what would be easier to say is, what's the scale? Notice when we're going down, if this is 3,500 and this is 3,000 or 3,500 and 3,000, that means each of these blue lines, we're looking at them here and here and here, are 250. So even though you're right, we went down 7, we actually went down 250 times, and each time we went down 7 times, it was 250. So your rise, you need to take and multiply those out quick. That's a negative 1,750 because we went down. And now counting over, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now careful, let's look down here. Notice we went over from 0 to 5, so that is 5. And now simplify that. Equals negative 350. Step 3, y equals, don't put the letter m, plug on in negative 350, m plus b. Step 4, find your y-intercept. Would you like to pick one of those points and plug it on in? We could pick one of these points up here and plug it into that equation in step 3, but since we can see right here at the top, we've got our y-intercept at a positive 3,500. You don't have to do any work. Now again, you could pick one of those points and plug it in, but we don't have to do that. So we've got that. So step 5, write it all out. y equals negative 350 x plus 3,500. Boom. You've correctly written an equation. Now, how much time does it take to complete the tunnel? A couple different ways to do this. You can say, Mr. Walls, I can see it in the graph. What do you mean you can see it in the graph? Well, you're right. If we want the tunnel completed, how many feet do they need to do? How much feet do we want left for them to keep working on if we want to complete it? 0. So where does this graph touch the 0 at? Yeah, right there at the 10, 0. 10 months. You're right. Wasn't that nice? No work needed. However, if you needed to do the work, let me insert a new page and we can show you how to do that. If we can't see it here in the graph, we can't see the X-intercept where there's nothing left to complete or work on, then we'll have to do a little bit of math. Taking our equation from part A, when we want to figure out how much is, when it's finished, what's left over is 0. There's no more feet of the tunnel to complete, no more water pipe to lay down, no more altitude for a parachute guy to go down. We are done. So we plug in 0 into the equation, and then we're going to solve that equation for wherever that x value is. To solve, add a negative 3,500 to both sides. Yep, show me the work all the time. Always show the work. I can do it mentally, Mr. Walls. I know, but show me the work. It's a good habit. It's worth a point, as well as it'll help us when we get to spots where we can't show the work. Solve for x. And divide them on out. Watch it. Since they're both negative, you get x equals 10. Then you can go back to the graph, and you can look down here on the x-axis where these numbers are at and see what the label is. It says that the label is time in months. So even though we wrote that down here, 10 months, if you had to do work like we did on this page, you could then write out 10 months. For me, when we talk about writing an equation, I like those 5 steps because it's the 5 things we need to do. By writing them out, we get that muscle memory, so that way we can write out equations like it says here in the skill, y equals mx plus b, or y equals mx if it goes straight through the origin. And you can also do that through any 2 ordered pairs. If they give you just 2 points, yes, you could graph them on a scratch piece of paper, or rather on a grid paper that's handed out to you, and you could do it that way, but you can also just stay right there with the 2 points, do everything like we did in the 5 steps without them being graphed. Because today we talk about writing equations of a line in slope-intercept form. So we want our final answer to be in y equals mx plus b, where m is your slope, some number or fraction, positive or negative, and b is your y-intercept, your initial starting value, whether positive or negative.